Oline and salutations to the Truth Core, whoever and wherever you may be on the planet. This is JLL recording on the 28th of October, 2021, with a challenge. Well, as you might expect, like most of things that come from yours truthfully, this is a very big deal. And I speak in a manner that is consistent with my atrocious sense of self-importance and my grandiosity. So it's not just a small challenge, it's a big challenge, a 7-point challenge. And I'm directing it to what I'm going to call internet spiritual gurus, of which some people might argue I am an example. Now, I will name some specific individuals, but in the first place, the general concept of an internet spiritual guru is someone on the internet, well-known, popular, who is recognized and who presents himself or herself as propagating and sharing information, knowledge, insight, philosophy relative to spiritual development, whatever the frack that is. You know, I don't use the word spiritual, but I'm using it here because it's trendy. Now, these gurus or spiritual teachers may well have careers off the internet. They may be authors of books, they may be individuals who present conferences or seminars or workshops. They could have a whole range of activities apart from their presence on the internet. But I'm pointing to their presence on the internet because I'm present on the internet. And I think you would agree that there's a certain category of known spiritual teacher who uses the internet as a medium to teach and to communicate, as I myself do, guilty as charged. So that's the general concept. And now I'll give you some examples. First one that comes to mind is Greg Braden, and you'll see I've used a photograph of Greg for the thumbnail. Oh, by the way, Greg, while I have your attention, I want to say I'm sorry about those sample hair products you left on my doorstep, but the neighborhood dog ate them. So he's pretty prominent, and his presence on the internet is a strong one. I would say he's in the upper echelon of spiritual teachers. And he has associations outside the internet with Gaia.com and Gaia TV. And so he has quite a career. Another name that comes to mind is my former colleague, Jay Widener, well known on many internet platforms. Now, if Jay's listening, I have this to say. In Amsterdam, in October 2008, you recorded video and audio of me running to something like 6 or 8 hours. I don't know where that material is. I never received copies of what you recorded. I have had hints that it is out there somewhere on the internet or excerpts from it. And I'd like to have that material. Also, I'd like to mention that the DVD you did based on that meeting in Amsterdam, called The Dawn of Planetary Tantra, is fundamentally incorrect in the way that it represents the Sophianic narrative. The way that you put it together makes it appear as if Sophia's plunge from the pleroma produced an accidental side effect, which was the human species. That is not true. It produced the archontic species. So I would like to know if that was an error, a mistake, or if it was deliberate. Simple question. So who else is in the gang? I don't know. David Wilcox, Simon Parks. I would consider Simon Parks to be more of a gubu than a guru. You might even include such people as Russell Brand. When I say spiritual teacher, I mean someone who presumes to talk about mysticism or metaphysics or aspects of ancient history such as secret teachings, secret doctrines, secret societies such as the Gnostics. Someone who talks in that vein and builds up their message drawing from that material. It's fair to say it's pretty obvious that they do so, correct? And the mystical and metaphysical aspects of what they teach can be prominent. And I would assume that the purpose of their teaching is to enlighten people or educate people about consciousness. What is consciousness? How does it work? And associated with that primary question, of course, is the question of origins. So what is the origin of consciousness, or the origin of humanity and the earth? So those are all questions and issues that go into the agenda of discussion of internet spiritual gurus. I'm happy with what I'm saying, and I'm confident that I'm not misrepresenting anyone here. Also, I might add, and this is an important addition, that the talking points frequently include the themes of archons, a word which I introduced into the discourse some years ago, ETs, UFOs, and also the subject of psychedelic experience and the use of entheogens and psychoactive plants for the purposes of cognitive experimentation. Obviously, the record shows I talk about all those things myself, don't I? So I'm putting us all in the same category in that respect. Although I don't call myself a spiritual teacher, I prefer to say visionary teacher. But you get the picture. So now, what's the challenge? What are the 7 points in the challenge that I am declaring in this talk? 1. Reveal yourself. Say something about how it all began, where it all began. What were the initial circumstances of your spiritual quest that led to the results you share with the world today? Talk about your childhood, of incidents that were decisive in setting you on your course. Talk about anything that has influenced you. Reveal the process that you've gone through to reach where you are today. Talk about the things that you worked through, what you discarded. What systems did you work through? What ancient teachings or systems of metaphysics did you study and practice, possibly even? What experimentation did you undertake personally in your life, in your early years, before you began to formulate the basis of what you have to say today? Reveal yourself. Talk about your sexual life. Talk about what sex means to you and how you view the gender binary. Reveal your sexual orientation. Are you heterosexual? Say something about how you regard the transgender movement and the ideology of transgenderism as a whole. Show yourself. in an honest and vulnerable way so that we can know something about you at that basic human level. 2. Describe your spiritual practice. Do you have a spiritual practice? Does it come from a particular tradition? For instance, are you a Gurdjieffian? Do you practice yoga of some school? If so, which school? Do you meditate? What do you do to maintain your mindset? What factors have shaped your spiritual attitude, and what practices do you use currently to maintain your course in life? Tell us about that. Frankly, openly. You might include an account of practices that you have done in the past that you don't do anymore. For instance, I used to use the tarot, and I don't do it anymore. I used to use the I Ching, and I don't do it anymore. Can you tell us something about yourself along those lines? 3. Tell us about your agenda. Yeah, that. You know, it's commonly assumed that spiritual teachers on the internet are simply there for benevolent purposes. They have the good fortune to have discovered things in their life, insights, truths, realizations, and now they turn around and give them back to the world for the benefit of others who are seeking to find a spiritual path. And it's commonly assumed that that's all there is to it. But that is certainly not the case. Everyone who appears on the internet has an agenda. What is your agenda? What is your ultimate picture of where you want to see it go? What is your view of the future? What kind of future do you want to see, and how do you place yourself as an agent contributing to that future that you want to see for yourself and others? What is it? Come out and say so in plain English and clear and concrete language so that those who listen to you can know where you're coming from and they don't have to guess about it. Included in the disclosure, to use a trendy word, of your agenda, I challenge you to openly state your guiding narrative. What is the narrative that guides your life and your spiritual practices? Is it the Anunnaki Sumerian narrative of a slave species? Is it the Darwinian narrative? Is it some kind of variation of theosophical or anthroposophical teaching? What is it? What is your guiding story? And from where do you derive that story? What are the foundations of the narrative in which you stand when you stand before the public and speak? 4. Tell us about your mistakes. What mistakes have you made? What ideas or practices or programs have you pursued that you found out over time were not productive, not authentic, maybe not correct, maybe deviant in some way? Tell us about how you have detected the deviance in your own mind as you've moved along the path of your spiritual journey. Name a specific error that you made at one time. Maybe it was an error that only involved you in the course of your life. Maybe it involved a group of people under your influence, or maybe it involved you being under the influence of someone else, such as a guru or a cult leader. Tell us about that. Name one error that you've made, that you've corrected, so that you have become more discerning and more clear in what you do know and more confident about how you know it. Explain one of your errors and give us the benefit of knowing what it taught you. Do that. I challenge you to do that. 5. Now pull up your knickers. This is a big one. And before I state what the challenge is, let me put it in context. Something that any intelligent observer will see, listening to spiritual gurus on the internet, is that they frequently cite science to frame or validate or endorse their viewpoints. And the way they do this routinely refers to certain well-known doctrines in science. I'm going to call them dogmas, really. For instance, quantum physics, string theory, relativity theory. And within those generic areas, there are particular topics like quantum interactivity, the Higgs boson, the God particle. There's a batch of 10 or 20 different scientific concepts. And spiritual teachers on the internet routinely and frequently refer to these concepts and to the larger framework of, say, quantum physics in order to back up what they teach. So there is a well-established practice of using these established fields of conventional science in the process of teaching spirituality. Is that not correct? Now, I won't go into a refutation, but I will let you know out front that I consider those scientific doctrines to be absurd, pointless, fallacious, and deviant. And they all come out of the field of scientism, in which science is a new religion. And they are the products of frauds, quackademics. They are the products of mathematical fiction. Those who have listened to me for a while know that I stand strongly against those fraudulent doctrines of science, and I would never use them to endorse or legitimate anything that I wish to teach. Instead, and in this case, it's such a beautiful word, instead, I use something else, and therein resides the 5th point of this challenge. Talk about the humanities. Let's see you use anything from the realm of the humanities, arts and literature, the culture of the races over the course of time, as an accessory of your teaching, as something that can enrich it and deepen it. Art, literature, poetry, sculpture, through the ages. Let's see you refer to the Greek tragedies. Let's see you cite Sophocles or Euripides. Let's see you come forward, say, into the medieval period of European history. Use the heroic legends upon which the national identity of European peoples are based. Talk about them. Talk about the great works of medieval literature, Parzival, Tristan and Isolde, the Germanic legends, the Scandinavian legends, refer to the national epic of Finland, the Kalevala, or the Icelandic Eddas, refer to the rich literature and art of the late medieval period, the troubadours. Come ahead into the Renaissance. Cite the artists and philosophy of the Renaissance, the great poets like Cavalcante. Use literature, the arts, and the humanities to embellish what you teach. Let's see you do that. Let's see you do it across a broad spectrum. Coming into the period of the Romantics, who was Alexander von Humboldt, and what can he say about Gaia theory? Who were the great German Romantics, the French Romantics, the English Romantics? Talk about the poetry of William Blake, about his mythological creations and how they are relevant to the spiritual quest today. Come forward from the Romantic period. Come into modernism. Talk about Ezra Pound. Talk about the tremendous revolution at the end of the 19th century, the fin de siècle. Use examples of artists, writers, poets, painters, sculptors, dancers like Isadora Duncan. Talk about their lives in detail. Show us that you know their biographies, that you understand what they struggled with. For instance, the Russian poet Marina Tsvetaeva. Talk about her. What did she try to say in her poetry? What were the conditions in which she lived? What does it have to say to us today? How can the humanities contribute to reaching the beauty to come? How can the achievements in poetry, art, and literature in the past from various races around the world, but principally from the white European races, how can that contribute to the richness and depth of a spiritual viewpoint and practice today? Educate us about that. Let's see you do that. Tell us something about the genre of the novel, about, say, Gothic literature. Explain how the novel emerged in the 18th century. Who were the primary exemplars of the first novels written in English and other languages? And tell us about how their creations are relevant today and are worth knowing and reading and studying in order to enrich and direct those who seek to be on a path of spiritual evolution today. Do that. Point 6. Talk about me. Or even worse, and I shudder to propose this, talk to me. Dialogue with me. I've noticed that on GaiaCom, Gaia TV, there's considerable content about Gnosticism. There are flashy, high-production videos with interviews, but I'm not in those interviews. Why not? So interview me, or talk about me. Tell the world what you think about Non in His image. Show them that you know what I intended to say in the book. Don't misrepresent me. And then if you differ, if you have another view of Gnosticism that's different from mine, and I know you do, well, explain what it is. And maybe you can gain credibility by comparing your interpretations of Gnosticism to mine. It's a fact that there are two versions of Gnosticism floating around on the planet today. One is mine, and one is the other. in certain variations. While I'm at it, I'll get back to another specific individual, my former friend and colleague, Graham Hancock. Now, Graham Hancock is on record as talking about Gnosticism and giving his version of what it is. His interpretation, completely different from mine. Well, talk to me about it. Ask me about it. Or if you can't stand to talk to me, and many people can't, then say something about it to your public. Don't act as if you don't know that I exist and that Not in His Image was never published and has now been republished after 15 years. One of the claims in Not in His Image is that I point to the source of evil on this planet. And I identify what is called Zadik, which is the root of transhumanism and master race ideology. Would you care to say a few words about that, either pro or con? I'm sure your listeners would be fascinated by whatever you might say. And they might be even more convinced in the correctness of your spin on Gnosticism. Or, of course, there's a risk that they might not. Take the risk. Specifically, regarding the spin on Gnosticism that's coming from Graham Hancock, well, I have this to say. And Graham, if you're listening, this is your old friend talking. It appears that you've come out with a new book, which is called The Divine Spark. I haven't read it yet. Probably I will take a look at it, and I might even present a review of it on the internet. Imagine that. But for right now, I have to say that the title you've chosen is extremely revealing. And I can infer from that title something of what may be in the message of your book. One of the interpretations of Gnosticism, the prevalent one, among those who don't talk about me or with me, is the assumption that Gnostics taught that human beings all have a divine spark, a God spark within them that has become immersed and lost in the dark labyrinth of matter in the material world. And so according to their view, the goal of Gnostic practice then and now, as if they could conceive of a Gnostic practice today, is to free the divine spark from entrapment in the darkness. Well, Graham, it so happens that the trope, the divine spark, doesn't come from Gnosticism. It comes out of the Talmud. And so if you're titling a book, The Divine Spark, I'm inclined to think, at first sight, I'll correct myself if I'm wrong, that you are actually propagating a Talmudic doctrine under the guise of talking about Gnosticism. And if that's the case, it's really, really unfortunate for you. And I promise you that I will not let it pass without comment. Finally, point 7. I challenge you to state openly and honestly your view of the Albanian problem. So there it is. Those are the 7 points of my open challenge. All 7 of those points define a standard to meet if you present yourself as a spiritual teacher on the internet today. I challenge you to measure yourself against that standard. And if I may dare to be brutally honest, I will give you my opinion in a pithy little proposition. Anyone who cannot meet and demonstrate the 7 points of that standard is inferior to anyone who can. And to those who are listening, I speak to you now, and not to the presumed spiritual gurus. I advise you as a friend that anyone who does not meet the 7 points of this challenge is quite simply unworthy of your trust and your respect, and may be not only misinformed and uneducated and inadequate in presuming to teach you anything spiritual, but such individuals may also be deviant. Enough said. And I'll be seeing you, in the beauty to come.